حواس أورمو من صوتا مقالا مينيابوليس في سين باول أكسبنا الله سيجرات تمرا
حواسني أورمو مينيسوتا كوريك انديسيتو ديغرس أمتا OMN وجين تو
عام ساقنا أفر برك ولا ما في ديك دمي سدين قافة بياد البتا واري بود ساعتي تقو بيام من رأي قلو عند ساعتي سديت بيام بتم سغنتا تومس OMN في مريا واسا قبيسون اسنا فيرني جرو
حواسني أورمو كتاب الجنسة مينيسوتا كيس جراتن مرتو قبي كنرتي آكا هرماتني وامتش دياتي جرا
دايركتر رونانان OMN دجني قوتما
أبو بقلا غربا
أيون سياسة دكتور كدير حسين
شيخ ناصر حمزة في كيس موني برو سغنتا كنرتي ني أرقم
تيسون أفرجاشن مايك وينستريت سين باول مينيسوتا شان توكو دواسدي
odeeffannoo dabalataatiif lakkoofsa bilbilaa kanneenin koreek indeessituu sagantichaa qunnamuu ni dandeessu.
Tokko jaashan tokkom sadii lama sagal shan tokko jaashan.
Tokko torba jaha sadii shan jaha saddeet jaha lama sagal saddeet.
Tokko sagal shan lama saddee afur jaha sagal shan duwwaa afur.
Koottaa dhimma Oromoo fi Oromiyaa irratti waloon haa mari'annu.
OMN tumsuun qabsoo Oromoo tumsuudha.
Correct Institute Sagantica, Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, USA.
Hi everyone and welcome back to OMN Insight. My name is Soreti Kadir and I'm your host. And today, before we get into our program, we are going to play a short announcement.
Ashama kun sagale bridge reality gare Samuel Berhanuti manni jireenya ala namaaf ni barbaachisa inni kuni garuu jireenya tulbuu hore yaada namaa boqochiisa gaaddisa aargalfii ta'ee jiraachuuf nama sassachiisa maarree isinis kana bitachuu yoo feetan akkasumas kan ofii qabdan gurgurtanii bu'a qabeessa ta'uun gara xiqqaatti yookaan gara guddaatti jijjiirrachuu yoo barbaaddan dafaa mariisisa bridge reality Tora bilbila keenya torba ja'a sadii torba afur afur saddeet sadii ja'a lamarratti nuuf bilbila Bridge Reality garee Samuel Berhanuti.
To continue our discussion on the ongoing negotiations between the Oromo Liberation Army and the Ethiopian government and the overall conditions of peace and war in Oromia, today we have the privilege of being joined by Dr. Asoba Beyan, who is a long-term participant in the Oromo struggle for liberation and self-determination, and who is also a human rights activist and a historian. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Beyan.
Thank you for having me, Soreti. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Pleasure. Dr. Beyan, last week we saw the first round of negotiations between the Oromo Liberation Army and the Ethiopian government conclude with, according to a statement released by the Oromo Liberation Army, an understanding reached on outstanding matters, but no agreement reached on key political matters. According to Addis Standard, Hailu Adunya, head of the communications office of the Oromia regional state, said in a briefing to local media just yesterday that the regional and federal governments were determined to resolve the differences with the OLA through dialogue and to make the next talks fruitful. However, and this is still quoting from the report by Addis Standard, earlier the OLA accused the government of launching a military offensive in Jaldu in West Showa and Adami Tullu in East Showa, zones of the Oromia regional state. Dr. Beyan, how are you viewing these negotiations in the overall political history of negotiations between the Oromo struggle for liberation and Ethiopia? And what's different or the same between now and the past?
Well, thank you, Soreti, again. The topic of our discussion really tells everything. Peace and war in Oromia, and peace and war in Ethiopia, actually, that in a larger context. Ethiopia was built by force. The empire of Ethiopia was built by force, maintained by force of arms, and the whole history of Ethiopia is a history of war. Rather, many wars. So there was no really history of peace in the modern state of Ethiopia and even in the previous Abyssinian kingdom. Oromo, to the contrary, prior to the conquest of the 19th century that incorporated the Oromo people and other, that's called southern people of Ethiopia into Ethiopia by force, by conquest, Oromo used to live peacefully in its own country and under the democratic system of governance, Gada, that they built, which is really a model system of governance, very democratic. They elect their own people. They remove their people, their leaders when they violate the rules and the constitutions of the country, when they are not up to the expectations or incapable to discharge their duties. They used to impeach their leaders. And leaders were elected for a limited period of time, for 8 years. So such were the Oromo society prior to the forceful conquest of the 19th century by King Minilik of Shawa, and at the historical time of the partition of Africa among European colonial powers. So now, what is the history of Oromo with Ethiopia? It is history of war, not history of peace. It was a history of subjugation. It was a history of exploitation, marginalization, suppression. In a nutshell, Oromo's human rights, fundamental rights were violated since the 19th century. Oromo lost its freedom, its country, its self-rule. So, and the empire that conquers the Oromo and other southern peoples maintained the unity of the country, they call, by force. So there was no peace in Ethiopia. Ethiopia had never had, in the history of 150 years since Oromos were conquered and incorporated into Ethiopia, never had peace, never had free and democratic elections. All the resource of the country is spent on maintaining the empire together, and they call it unity of the country. I have never seen in history other nations that spends all largest part of the country's budget on military and also in subjugating its own people, so to say. So for a long time regarding the Oromo quest, Oromos always, history is proves this, try to peacefully demand their fundamental rights. Oromos wanted equality. Oromos wanted equal treatment. They wanted freedom. They wanted to restore all the rights and privileges, freedom they lost because of the conquest, peacefully. The response of successive Ethiopian regimes to the Oromo's fundamental grievances, fundamental political questions, is killing, hanging, and mass arrest and subjugation. Oromo lost the best and brightest of its sons and daughters, those who stood for freedom, for human dignity, and for equality. So for a long time, the Ethiopian regimes, successive regimes, just shunned, avoided even the existence of the Oromo grievance, even the existence of Oromo political questions. If we come to the last 50 years, since Oromos were organized and established the Oromo Liberation Front and crafted political program and they start pursuing successive Ethiopian regimes, they just denied even to call Oromo Liberation Front, to even recognize that such organization exists with a very legitimate, clear political objective, that is, restore the status quo ante, restore what Oromo lost because of the conquest, restores Oromo freedom, restores Oromo self-rule, and Oromos have the right to control on their natural resource, like any people in the world. They shunned it, they avoided it. Rather, they used to divide and conquer tactics to keep the Oromo under the yoke of subjugation and conquest. Now, what has happened recently, that for a long time, OLF was pronouncing its standing policy that they are ready to negotiate with the Ethiopian government about the political questions of the Oromo people. One, in the presence of third-party observers. Second, in a neutral country. Third, without any precondition. This has been long-standing policy of the Oromo Liberation Front and Abao Ola continuing. But the Ethiopian government never responded positively to such a positive gesture and goodwill to peacefully resolve the Oromo question. Now, conditions have changed, I believe, mostly because of the external pressure and also what has happened in Pretoria and Kenya between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF. The regime is, I think, compelled and finally agreed to sit down and negotiate with Abao Ola, Oromo Liberation Front, Oromo Liberation Army. That meeting took place in Tanzania, Zanzibar. The mere fact that the Ethiopian government accepted the conditions of the Oromo Liberation Front and the Oromo Liberation Army and sat down for negotiation itself is, I characterize it as a good beginning. I have to say turning point, but it's a very good beginning, one. But as they explained or stated in the very cordial statement issued by both parties, it was very positive. One, as I stated, the fact that the negotiation took place itself is a good beginning. Second, they have clearly stated that there was kind of understanding about each party's positions, underlined. But they also stated that they did not reach agreements on fundamental political issues of the discussion. What are those political issues is another matter. It's obvious. The third, even though they did not reach agreement, they agreed to continue the negotiation. Both sides believed, they stated, that they will continue the negotiations. Well, after this issued, as you stated, after this statement was issued, and both expressed that they are willing to continue another rounds of negotiations. Now, the Ethiopian government unleashed war, aggression against the Oromo Liberation Army in central Oromia. Well, look, negotiations require good faith and goodwill. Particularly, the Ethiopian government, the Abiy-led Ethiopian regime, should show really they have good faith and goodwill in engaging in these negotiations. The confidence-building measures that the regime should have taken would have indicated such goodwill, whether the goodwill exists or good faith exists or not. The government did not take any confidence-building measures except agreeing to meet with the Abao OLF Ola delegation. They did not take confidence-building such as cessation of hostilities. The Ethiopian government would have proved to the world, to the Oromo people, that they really meant business. They are really serious to negotiate and peacefully resolve legitimate grievances of the Oromo people, legitimate question of the Oromo people through peaceful means. They should have really declared that all political prisoners, particularly Oromo leaders and political prisoners who were in the country to pursue the struggle peacefully, are suffering in prisons, and they did not release them. That would have been one of the issues that indicate they really meant business and they have goodwill in coming to this negotiation table. They did not declare cessation of hostilities, regardless of such like now the aggression, the new aggression after this meeting that now the government has engaged into, that declared, it really very much undermines the confidence to negotiate with the regime. Nevertheless, I think as the spokesperson for government of Oromia indicated, if they are willing, they are working on to start the next round of negotiations, and that must be supported. So how do I see it? I'm not very optimistic, but always peace negotiations are not easy, and OLF, Oromo Liberation Army, as long as the government is also willing, they should continue in the negotiations. That's how it is, in a nutshell, Soretti, that's how I see it.
Thank you for that really robust context, that historical overview, Dr. Beyan. I want to ask you two questions before we move on to a very similar but a different part of the conversation. One is, what would you consider has to be non-negotiable on the part of the OLA? You have used language like fundamental grievances, fundamental Oromo questions. You've also mentioned self-rule here. But it would be really, I think, insightful if, from your perspective, you could give us some specific concrete. What should be non-negotiable demands on behalf of the OLA as these negotiations continue? And my second question, is you can answer at the same time, is, in the future, how important is diversity at the table on both sides, or for both parties? I'm talking gender diversity, age difference, regional representation, and the like.
Okay, I think that's a good question. Let me start with, if I forget your question, remind me. Let me start with what is non-negotiable. By the way, the Oromo Liberation Army delegation, the OLF OLA delegation, is discussing about the future and the fate of the Oromo people. Oromo people, as I've stated, that they have legitimate grievance against the Ethiopian state. Legitimate grievance. Oromos want to reinstate status quo ante prior to the conquest. What does that mean? Oromos want to exercise their right to self-determination. Oromos must be masters of their selves. The OLF program clearly indicates what are the objectives of the Oromo struggle. It's liberation and exercise the Oromo people's inalienable rights to self-determination. What does it mean? Oromos must decide their political status by this. How do they exercise their political status? How do they determine their political status? It's only through the decision of the Oromo people. Oromo people must vote what their political status will be, the future political status will be. They must decide what type of relationship, if at all, they want to have with the people in the Empire State of Ethiopia. And for sure, that relationship must be based on mutual respect, based on mutual interests, and voluntary. That doesn't undermine that Oromo people, regardless whether they establish independent Republic of Oromia or in any way, in any format, associate with the people in the Empire State of Ethiopia, Oromos must have their own state. They must rule themselves. A state that protects the interests of the Oromo people, a state that enables Oromo people to peacefully govern themselves, elect their leaders, and protect the dignity and security of the Oromo people. I mean, these are non-negotiable. Oromos must be their own masters, must be non-negotiable issue. How to go about it, how to peacefully determine this, these are negotiable. But the objective of the Oromo struggle is non-negotiable. That objective, in a nutshell, is that Oromos must determine their future political status. Oromos must freely pursue their economic, political, and cultural policies without any influence, extra influence. These are non-negotiable. What's negotiable is how to exercise it, how the Oromo people should decide it, and how Oromos can live with others peacefully. Oromos never said that we cannot live with other people. The question is how. How do we live with other people? We have to have our own home and then establish relationship with others. Oromos are very cognizant of the fact that this world is interdependent. Interdependent, you keep what you have, and you share with others what you have, and you gain also from others. But that doesn't mean that you don't have your own state, you don't have your own homeland. No, Oromos must ascertain their right in their homeland and then freely and voluntarily decide about their relationship with other people. So it's a new beginning. It's not like maintaining the imperial relationship of the Ethiopian state. Actually, for peaceful coexistence, for equality to prevail, for peace to prevail, Ethiopia must be de-imperialized. Imperial relations must end, and a new chapter, a chapter of equality, a chapter of peaceful relationship, a chapter based on mutual recognition and mutual interests must start. I mean, it is a big task, but that is really inevitable and non-negotiable for peace to prevail and for the objectives of the Oromo people to be implemented. Furthermore, regarding the diversity, for sure, look, I say this delegation of the Oromo Liberation Army and OLF that is negotiating with the Ethiopian people is representing in a revolutionary way, the interests of the Oromo people. They are negotiating on behalf of the Oromo people. The question is not really an organizational question. It is the question of the nation, the Oromo nation. So therefore, participation of all inclusiveness of the Oromo people in this process cannot be undermined at all. Gender participation and diverse Oromo diversity participation is very crucial for the success of the negotiation and for the future also of the Oromo nation. It is very crucial. I think they are mindful of that. Representation in as such is that Oromo did not elect these people. The Oromo Liberation Front leaders, the Oromo Liberation Front members, the OLA, Oromo Liberation Army, they are not elected by the people, but by mere fact that they are pursuing legitimate interests of the Oromo people, they, in a revolutionary way, they represent the Oromo people. But that doesn't mean that they have to undermine participation of all others. I think gender participation is very crucial, and all other religious as well as regional participations in this process is very crucial because we are laying foundation for the future Oromia. So the beginning itself must support that end of participation of the Oromo people, and I agree with you, Soretti, that's very crucial.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beyan. Moving on the 11th of May, Addis Standard reported that, and the rest of what I'm saying is a quote from Addis Standard's report, that the whereabouts of OLF Executive Committee members Abdi Ragasa and Michael Boran, its Central Committee member Kenesa Ayana, and its Gulele main office head Gada Oljira, as well as OLF senior officials Dawit Abdeta and Lemmi Bayina and Gada Gebisa remains unknown since they went missing. The OLF said this after 7 court-acquitted senior officials of the party went missing from police custody in Burayu, Oromia, special zone surrounding Finfinne on the evening of the 18th of April. I know you were also at one point in 2008, if I'm not mistaken, forgive me if that is a mistake, a spokesperson for the organization. What are these talks going to bring about, in your opinion, an end to these conditions of state violence, of political violence? And what is it about the Ethiopian state's relationship to the Oromo nation and the Oromo's existence as a politicized people, as a political nation? What is it about the Ethiopian state's relationship to the Oromo that has to change for this kind of political violence to change?
Thank you. Very good question. To begin with, really what has happened and is happening to the leaders of the Oromo Liberation Front, like Abdi Ragasa and many others, Michael Boran and many others, who are suffering in the dungeons of the Ethiopian government's prison, is a travesty of justice. Imagine, Oromo Liberation Front, led by Dawood Ibsa, they returned back home based on the call of Abiy government's regime to pursue their objectives peacefully. They decided that from then on, they will struggle peacefully, they will participate in elections, and they are also registered by the country's board of elections, and they have certificate. But when election times approach, after really very unconstitutional postponement of the election, the Abiy government, the Ethiopian state, continued to implement the same political position against the Oromo Liberation Front. It's not only OLF that returned home at that time. Another group from Asmara called Gumbo 7, that's led by Dr. Beyan Asoba, was also called back and returned home. They also stopped armed struggle, and they decided to participate in the peaceful struggle to pursue their objectives also. But guess what? The way the Oromo Liberation Front was treated and the way Gumbo 7 group is treated is entirely different. It tells how the Ethiopian regime treats the Oromo case. Beyan Asoba and his group are now legally functioning. They were subjected to no harassment, no imprisonment. Even Beyan Asoba, leader of that group, is member of the Abiy's government, member of the cabinet. What happened to the OLF? The Ethiopian state, whether it's led by Abiy, by Meles Zenawi, by Mengistu Haile Mariam, they have no tolerance for the Oromo question. They can't. This is the issue. Oromo is a political majority that has become, for the last 150 years, and is a political minority. Oromos did not have power in the country, are not allowed, because these are Oromos are subject people, conquered people, and people who aspire for liberation. Ethiopian regimes, now or previous ones, never treated Oromo equally. The case of OLF leaders who are in prison, and the case of Beyan Asoba, how the unequal treatment, the double standard, exactly tells how Ethiopia treats the Oromo people and the Oromo leaders. These leaders, like Abdullah Gasa and others, were accused falsely by the regime for terrorism and many other crimes, so to say. The court repeatedly accused them, stating that they committed no crime. They should not be even arrested in the first place. Guess what? When they are released by the court in any other world that is based on the rule of law, the courts have the last say. When the court absolves someone, decides to free them to go, that's the end of it. But in Ethiopian case, different. The Ethiopian army and police waited for these people at the gate of the court, and again, kidnapped them, so to say, forces them into trucks and put them in jail. Look, this about 9 or 10 OLF leaders, they are arrested in different prisons. Sometimes the public doesn't even know where they are. Not only that, they are not even treated like prisoners where they are arrested. For example, I heard in Burayu, they were kept in Burayu police station, but the Burayu police station doesn't even have them in the list, in the roster of the prisoners there. They don't feed them. They don't treat them if they are sick. These people depend on other people who help them for their daily bread. If they are sick, they have to get somebody from outside who is generous enough to help them to see a doctor and be treated. Look, this is a travesty of justice. It shows how much this regime is so vicious when it comes to the Oromo people. No political leaders who returned home from other country to pursue their objective peacefully, and of course, accepting the call of the Abiy regime in the early stage of the reform after 2019. None were treated like that. None of them. The Ogadenis returned to home. They were not subject to such treatment. The Gumbo 7 and many others returned home. They were not subject to such vicious, inhumane, and brutal treatment. And it is a travesty of justice. For Oromo, it tells us really what the Ethiopian state is when the Oromo issue came came in, when the Oromo issue comes forward, when Oromos raise their question. Ethiopia successive regimes did not treat Oromos equally. They did not treat Oromo politicians equally like others. It's always, when it comes to Oromo, it's a double standard, a violation of human rights. So under this background, now we are engaging, OLF, OLA is engaging in negotiations with the Ethiopian government. All this must end because of this, if this negotiation is successful. Otherwise, for Oromo, it is the same like 150 years ago, like 30 years ago, like 50 years ago. Nothing changed for the Oromo. What do the Ethiopian regimes want for the Oromo? Just to serve, to forget about their identity, to forget about their rights, and serve the regime. And Oromos served the Ethiopian state than anyone, in every regards. The wealth of the Ethiopian state nation depends on the wealth of the Oromia. The Ethiopian army, best generals are Oromos. The Ethiopian athletes that made Ethiopia known in the world, starting from Baba Bikila up to Daratu Tulu and many others now, are Oromos. But Ethiopia never paid back Oromos with respect. This is the issue. This is the dilemma, Soretti, that the world should understand. This is the dilemma also Oromos must deal with. I said before, we are numerical majority and political minority. Not only minority, suppressed, controlled, subjugated minority politically. This is the fact.
Thank you, Dr. Beyan. I'm curious to know, because you were speaking quite specifically about the conditions that these political prisoners that we've mentioned here are facing. So I'm wondering, have you either had the chance to speak to them or somebody that you're in direct contact with? Have they had the chance to tell you perhaps about conversations they've had about these political processes and generally where their spirits are right now, what their health conditions are like right now?
I did not speak to them.
I'm sorry.
It's a public knowledge. What has happened to them is public knowledge. I also know people who know about them, and I follow it, and I know these people. I'm sorry if I'm moved.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. So I follow the situation. That everything I have said is public knowledge. No, it's irrefutable. No one can refute these factors. That these people were freed by courts, no one can dispute that. After the court is decided to release them and release them, the government kept them in jail. This is like a shameful record for this regime. They did not respect their own laws. They did not respect their own courts. It is such a travesty of justice. And they are sick. Many of them are sick. They develop different sicknesses. And the government doesn't treat them. They don't get medical attention. Yeah. Not for any other reason. Just they stood for the rights and freedoms.
Yeah. Dr. Beyan, you know, this might be a little bit out of, you know, what some might regard as journalistic ethic, but I do want to share with you when I was home last 2020, I had the opportunity to meet Abdi Ragasa and have a conversation with him, and it was an extremely memorable experience as a young person in this struggle. He asked me, how long have you been in the country? I said, I've been here about 3 months. He goes, so what have you done yet? I said, well, I've just been becoming acquainted with the place. I've not really done anything yet. And he said, we really don't have much time. Like every minute counts at this point. And I'm sharing this story, you know, to strengthen the both of us and all of the people of our nation and all people who stand with human rights, who are watching this and who can empathize with what you're sharing with us today and what we're talking about today. That the people who are not just these members, the people that we have mentioned here today who are in prison, but really the thousands and thousands of people across that country who are suffering from what you have rightfully called a travesty of justice. And so I have great hope and great faith that our struggle will continue. And I'm deeply grateful to you today, Dr. Beyan, for sharing with us your insights, your knowledge, and sharing with us really what has, in my opinion, been great conviction and great hope that our struggle and this struggle, this political struggle, a struggle that is relatable, in my opinion, globally across human experiences, this struggle will reach its end in a positive way. Again, I thank you so much for your time today, Beyan.
I thank you, and I'm sorry that I was moved.
No,
it is human to be moved.
It is human, yeah. In
that situation, I thank you, Soreti.
Hi, thank you. Well, everybody, I think that was a really important conversation. I feel enriched for it. I feel motivated for it. And I hope that you do too. Again, this is an extremely quintessential time, not just in the history of the Oromo political struggle, but also in the history of Ethiopia as a state, and also in the history of struggles of people in the global south, of oppressed people globally who are struggling for their freedoms, for their rights, and for their self-determination. So we will be continuing this discussion in the coming weeks, and I invite you to join us as we do that. You are watching OMN Insight. My name is Soreti Kadia, and I will see you next week.
Hawaasa Oromoo biyya Kaanaadaa magaalaa Toorontoo fi naannoo ishee jiraataniif OMN waxabajjii 17 bara 2023 Toorontootti waltajjii marii hawaasaa OMN Community Engagement qopheessuu wajjin beeksisuu gammachuu guddaadhaan. Guyyaa kanatti Daayirektarri olaanaa OMN Dajanee Guutamaa fi Aadde Naadiyaa Abbaa biyyaa keessummoota kabajaa ta'uun gidduu keessanitti argamu. Dhimma waloo uummata keenyaa fi gahee adda durummaa OMN akka miidiyaa Oromootti bahaa jiru akkaataa cimsuun danda'amu irrattis isin waliin mari'atu. Marree waxabajjii 17 bara 2023 sa'a tokko yookaan 1 PM irraa eegalee beellamni keessan waliin haa ta'u jecha guyyaa kanatti qaamaan dhiyaachuun miidiyaa keessan akka tumsitan boriifis humna OMN ta'uu keessan akka mul'iftan kabaja guddaan isin affeerree jirra. Bakki walgahii High Park Area 4 teessoon 1873 Bloor Street West on M6R 2Z3 Canada. Bakki yaa'ii filan paarkii guddaa giddugala bashannana daa'immanii of keessatti hammate waan ta'eef ijoollee keessan qabadhaa kottaa qaamaaf qalbii guutuun waliin dabarsaatin. Odeeffannoo dabalataaf gama lakkoofsa bilbilaa keenya 647-701-4214 yookaan 647-745-3272 koree qindeessituu sagantichaa quunnamuu dandeessu. OMN ijaa fi gurra uummataa.
Hawaasa Oromoo Ameerikaa kutaa bulchiinsa Ayiwaa fi Nebraaskaa jiraatan maraaf.
Hawaasni Oromoo Ayiwaa fi Nebraaskaa Suuland waxabajjii 18 bara 2023 sa'aatii 1 PM irraa jalqabuun sagantaa tumsaa OMN qopheessanii isin eegaatti jiru.
Deeggarsa miidiyaa uummata bal'aa OMN fi marii hawaasaa kanarratti uummanni Oromoo magaalota Suusiitii Ayiwaa fi Saawus Suusiitii Nebraaskaa naannoo ishee jiraatan martuu affeeramtanii jirtu jedha koreen qindeessituu sagantichaa.
Keessummoonni sagantaa kana irratti argaman Daayirektarii olaanaa OMN Dajanee Guutamaa, qindeessaa koree deeggarsaa OMN Abdulaziz Daatuu fi keessummoota kanneen birooti.
Hawaasni Oromoo magaalota ollaa Omahaa, Suufar Saawus Daakotaam, Linkan, Grand Island, Nebraaskaa Siitim, Waazingitan, Minisootaa fi kan biroo jiraatan sagantaa tumsa miidiyaa uummataa kana irratti affeeramtanii jirtu jedha koreen qindeessituu sagantichaa.
Teessoo 1122 Jackson Street, Sioux City, Iowa 51105.
Odeeffannoo dabalataatiif lakkoofsa bilbilaa kana koree qindeessituu sagantichaa quunnamuu dandeessu.
OMN utubuun Oromummaa utubuudha. OMN cinaa haa dhaabbannu.
Koree qindeessituu sagantichaa Ayiwaa fi Nebraaskaa Ameerikaa.